Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We have a very exciting little workshop from one of our regional advisors. So Shira Freiman is currently a 1L, I think that I'm saying that in the correct way, at the Widener University Delaware Law School, where she is pursuing her Juris Doctorate. Shira founded Temple University's chapter of It's on Us during the summer of her sophomore year as an undergraduate student and served as the chapter's president for the rest of her college career. She loves plants, her dog Tucker, and advocating for survivors. She hopes to one day be a lawyer representing those impacted by interpersonal violence who choose to seek non-incarceratory, I'm so bad with that word, forms of justice against those who perpetrate harm. And that will segue very well into her actual presentation, which is on non-incarceratory forms of justice. Just as a trigger warning, as I always say at the beginning, we will be discussing sexual violence. So if you need to leave or take a break at any point, you are welcome to do so. I will absolutely let you back in, so no worries about not getting back in. Also, this call will be recorded, just as an FYI, and it will be available afterwards on our YouTube channel. It's up to you to keep your camera on or off. I do ask that you stay on mute, at least until we do a little question and answer session. And in conjunction with that, this is a community space. We'd love to see your comments and questions as the presentation goes on. So send them in the chat to me or just to everyone. We can have a great conversation as we go. And I'm going to paste some resources for in terms of trigger warning. And then I also wanted to let everyone know quickly that in response to the recent Title IX letter that was sent out earlier this week, we will be having a virtual town hall on April 13th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like for survivors and for schools. So I'm going to paste the link to sign up for that as well. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Shira and we will get started.
All right, hello everyone. As Maeve just said, my name is Shira Freiman. I am currently a regional advisor with It's on Us for Region 6, overseeing the Mid-Atlantic region of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, New York, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. In addition to that, as Maeve said, I'm currently a 1L at the Widener University Delaware Law School. Before I get into this presentation, I just kind of want to preface everything by saying, of course, I'm a law student, I'm not a lawyer. So anything I say is not to be taken as legal advice. For any questions pertaining specifically to perhaps your own case or cases of people that you may know, definitely reach out to a lawyer. However, I am able to answer any kind of general questions. And if I don't know the answer, I will absolutely make clear that I don't know the answer and help direct you to a resource or an individual who will. So here are some legal options for survivors. Let's get into it. So first, I know that this presentation is a little bit more about not talking about the incarceratory punishments available for survivors to pursue against their perpetrators. However, because it is an option and we really want to make survivors aware of all of the possible options that they can pursue, I thought that it was really important to kind of talk about. So what does this look like? So it may differ depending on your jurisdiction or locality, but generally the initial police report is made. So the survivor will come forward, make a police report, file a complaint. Usually the parties will be interviewed by law enforcement. So the parties meaning the victim survivor, as well as the accused, and if there were any other parties involved in the alleged situation. And then charges are either pressed or the case can be withdrawn if the police decide that there's not enough evidence or if it's not something that they choose to pursue. You can also kind of circumnavigate going to the police sometimes by reaching out directly to your district attorney's office and letting them know. It's not as common. They probably will direct you to go to your local police department. However, that is an option as well. If you decide, hey, I really don't want to try working with the police, is there a possibility that I can just work directly through the district attorney's office? And then you have what's called a preliminary hearing, presuming that they do decide to pursue charges. And in that preliminary hearing is when you would it would be the victim's first time kind of on the stand in the court, giving their testimony about what happened. They may be questioned, things like that. And that's the opportunity for the court to determine whether or not there's enough evidence to move forward to the next court, which would lead you to the trial. However, sometimes in between that preliminary hearing and trial, or sometimes even during the trial, there may be an opportunity for plea bargaining. So plea bargaining is really when the lawyers, the different counsels, what they're also referred to as, they'll be kind of talking back and forth, saying, how are you comfortable, with this sentence of XYZ years? Are you comfortable with community service or stay away order? I'll talk a little bit more about those in the future. And it's really important to note that while the victim survivor may be asked what their opinion is on the plea bargaining, ultimately it is up to the assistant district attorney who's in charge of heading the prosecution to kind of make that determination. However, it is really important for them to kind of ask the victim, what they think would be appropriate, but it is kind of at the discretion of the district attorney. And then if there's a trial and the perpetrator is found guilty, then there would be a sentencing hearing. And so a lot of times people kind of ask, how involved do I as a victim survivor need to be if I do choose to pursue criminal charges? So very uncommonly, but sometimes the survivor may not need to be involved at all. The district attorney's office may decide that they have enough evidence to pursue something without the survivor getting involved. However, that's really uncommon. I just wanted to, provide that information because there are certainly instances where that is the case. And it's also important to note that in the criminal system, the victim survivor is known as the key witness. So they will that's just kind of something to recognize, because as a witness, that does mean that you can be cross-examined. So that does mean that the defense counsel who's representing the alleged perpetrator can kind of come and ask you questions. And a lot of times people have reported that, they're invasive questions, they're really difficult to answer. And I just really want to be open and honest with you all about the way that that system works. So I really just wanted to make sure that everyone is kind of aware of that. However, a lot of jurisdictions do have what are called rape shield laws and different motions that exist to protect the survivor. So I'm located in Pennsylvania, so I'm most familiar with Pennsylvania law. So I know that Pennsylvania has a rape shield law. So in criminal courts, that means that unless there's been some kind of direct motion from the judge to kind of say that the past sexual history of the survivor can be allowed in the system, that normally will not be allowed. Additionally, you may be wondering why I keep using the word victim. Some people feel more comfortable with the term victim, some survivor, some victim survivor. Everyone really has their own preference. However, in the criminal court system, as I kind of talked a little bit about before, the survivor is called the key witness, or they may also be called the victim. So again, that's kind of more of a legal term of art. So you will hear the word victim if you do choose to pursue a criminal case. And some kind of options you can have if you are a survivor who decides to go through the criminal system. You can request a victim advocate to be there with you. So in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, if any of you are familiar with that area, Women Organized Against Rape, also known as WAR, has a victim advocate center where they can have individuals kind of come and support you. They have really extensive knowledge about the legal system and the different rights that you have as a survivor. So they can be a really great resource to kind of just be a hand to hold and someone to really be present with you throughout the entirety of the process, because it can be really scary. And I talked a little bit about cross-examination. So just really preparing for that and just knowing that it's coming. And then one of, I think, the most impactful things is called the victim impact statement. That is usually given at the sentencing hearing if the perpetrator has been found guilty. And that's really an opportunity for the survivor to use their voice and really share how this has had such a grave impact on them. And it can kind of help influence the court to determine what the appropriate sentence would be against the perpetrator by seeing how it impacted the survivor, sometimes even the survivor's family or friends or people who are aware of the situation and really saw how it impacted the survivor head on, have the opportunity to share that with the court. All right, so moving on to civil recourse. So the way that sexual assault cases would be handled if you decide to pursue something civilly would oftentimes be under the umbrella of what is called personal injury. And the way that that works is recovery of damages. So damages is, again, kind of a legal term of art to talk about the things that you can recover that are monetary, usually to compensate the victim survivor either for therapy costs, emotional distress, if there were any physical injuries, things like that, they exist to help kind of make the survivor whole again, is what the kind of legal idea behind it is. And the way that that works is through collection of assets. So the assets would be assessed of the individual who you are suing. And then the court kind of handles everything from there to determine whether one needs to be compensated, or sometimes they'll even impose what are called punitive damages, which is to punish the individual for their conduct. And what's really important to note with filing a civil suit is that, well, of course, in the criminal system, there can be multiple individuals held accountable. However, due to the different standard in the criminal court, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, as opposed to in the civil courts, which is a preponderance of the evidence, sometimes it is a little bit easier for survivors to obtain justice in this way because it is a lower standard. So for example, individuals more than just the perpetrator may be liable. So whether that be a university, a fraternity, a sorority, a sports team, or any kind of other affiliated organization who may have played a part in the situation that occurred, you can absolutely attempt some civil recourse against them. And it's really important to note to be mindful of your state statute of limitations. Speaking specifically to Pennsylvania, it is 2 years for a personal injury case. Please check directly with your specific state or jurisdiction. I'm more than happy to send over some resources to you all so that you can identify the statute of limitations within your own jurisdiction. The thing that's important to note with that is that some people think, oh no, this happened, a year and a half ago. I know that court cases, whether civil or criminal, can take a long period of time. I'm going to run out of time after I file. Well, the good thing about the statute of limitations is if it's, let's say, a 2-year statute of limitations, if you file the day before that 2-year statute is up, even if it takes 3 years for that litigation to go through, that 2-year statute of limitation applies to when you first have to file. So as long as it's filed prior to that statute of limitations running out, you're totally good and you can pursue. And again, talk to a lawyer. They will have, the most information about what is best for you and things like that. I also have in here a little link to a resource to kind of talk about what a personal injury suit is and how sexual assault works within that. And another thing people kind of ask is, can I file a criminal and a civil complaint? Absolutely, yes. So in the criminal system, the prosecutor, the district attorney, the assistant district attorney, these are all words that I'm using interchangeably. They represent the state. If you decide to pursue a civil case, then your civil lawyer would represent you. So you may have 2 people working concurrently with you, with one representing your individual interests, while the other represents the state's interests. So it's really important to kind of let both the prosecutor on the criminal side and your civil lawyer on the civil side, just let them know that you're working with the other system as well, because it's really important for them to have that open line of communication, particularly because evidence that's not allowed in criminal court may be allowed in civil court. So for example, in civil court, things such as therapy records, relationship history, witnesses who may not have been allowed to speak at the criminal trial on the behalf of the defendant, who again is the accused, would potentially be allowed in on the civil side, and kind of having them run concurrently and allowing that evidence in on the civil side may make it so that they are possible to be admitted on the criminal side because it's already been discovered. However, that's something that's specific to every case. So I can't really tell you that that would or would not happen. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you're aware of all of the resources and all of the people who are existing in the system to help you so that they can help you make that ultimate decision, what's best for you. And oftentimes people ask, is it if I'm found, if the perpetrator is found guilty in the criminal court, does that mean that I win in civil court? And that's not necessarily going to be the case. So your perpetrator can be found liable in both courts, in just one, or none. All right, moving on to Title IX. So I think a lot of times people kind of misunderstand what Title IX is. They oftentimes ask, what is it? How can it help me? Does it only apply to women in sports? I think that's a lot of times people think it really only applies to women in sports. And that's definitely a big part of it. However, that's not the only protections that Title IX has. So it is an act that is part of 1972, and it applies to all institutions receiving federal funding. And it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. So that can include women in sports, dispersion of funds, and making sure that things are equitable to all of the sexes. But it also protects individuals from discrimination on the basis of sex. And that encompasses sexual violence, domestic violence, stalking, sexual harassment. And the institution has a duty to handle those cases appropriately when they're brought to them. So the requirements of institutions under Title IX include having in place a policy against sex discrimination, a designated Title IX coordinator, and to make the procedures known to complainants if they decide to make a complaint. So just an important thing to note about the designated Title IX coordinator. So that Title IX coordinator doesn't need to have just that specific position. It may be the president of the university who also acts as the Title IX coordinator. So I think a lot of people kind of confuse that sometimes. So just as long as the university or federally funded institution has at least one person who's designated to handle those Title IX procedures, then they would meet that threshold. And as Maeve was kind of talking about a little bit before I started, there have been in the past, I would say 2+ years, there have been a lot of changes to Title IX, and people have been really concerned about what this means for survivors. There's been a lot of confusion. So I really encourage all of you, if you have any questions about that, to really go to that town hall that Maeve was talking about on the 13th to express your frustrations, your concerns, all of your questions. There's also a fantastic organization out there called Know Your Nine that puts out amazing resources to help students really understand what Title IX does and can do for them. And so what if I want to file a Title IX complaint? So the way that that works is you can file a Title IX complaint against your university, your institution, the entity that you feel has mishandled your Title IX complaint that you originally made with the school. And you would file that over the phone, via email, or using this online form. So it's through the Office of Civil Rights. And you just kind of explain to them, what's been going on, what your complaint is, how the school or other institution didn't act in an appropriate way. And then they're able to kind of take things onto the next level. And if a school is found to not be in compliancy with Title IX, then they can actually lose their federal funding, which is, money talks. That's, something that universities and other institutions really hold close to them. So having that financial incentive to be following the proper rules and ensuring the safety of all of their students can really make a difference. So the last category that I wanted to talk about today are sexual violence protective orders. You may also be heard them referred to as stay-away orders, civil protection orders, judicial orders. It really depends on your specific locality and where you're located, what they call. And oftentimes people have, heard of restraining orders, and this is pretty much what people are referring to related to sexual violence. So they're similar to a PFA or protection from abuse. A lot of people are really familiar with those. The biggest difference between a protection from abuse and a sexual violence protective order is that for a protection from abuse, there oftentimes needs to be some kind of familial relationship, whether that be, a parent, a spouse, someone, a brother, a sister, something like that. However, with the sexual violence protective order, it is a civil order that does not need to be applied to someone who is in your family or you have some kind of blood or, familial relationship with. It can be someone who's been an intimate partner. It can be someone who you have had prior consensual intercourse or interactions with, and then an incident occurred. It's a lot more liberal in that regard, and that you can really bring it forth against anyone who's harmed you in a sexual violence manner. And so these two websites that I have attached, I will have someone drop them in the chat, or I can do that once we get into questions. They really provide a great way for you to be able to kind of see exactly what your direct locality, what the rules are, what the statute of limitations are, how you go about filing. Because like I said, the legal system is really hard to navigate, even having worked with individuals who work within it. It can be really confusing. There's a lot of different rules and laws, and every different jurisdiction has its own set of rules and laws. So it's really important to kind of be aware of the general overarching idea so that you know what questions to ask if you do decide to reach out to a lawyer or if you know someone who is. So really what I'm hoping to get out of this presentation is to provide all of you with as much general information as possible, and then kind of help direct you to the proper person if any of you have any individual questions that I can help out with, which brings me to my last slide, which is my contact information. So again, my name is Shira Freiman. There is my email address. And like I said, I am located in Philly. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions that I can related specifically to Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania area. And again, if I don't know the answer, I will certainly direct you to the proper person. And I believe, Maeve, if you'd like to come back on, we can do some questions. If anyone has any questions, I can answer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shira. That was awesome. I did just post the links to the info chart and the map in our chat as well. If anyone has any questions, feel free to post in our chat. You are also at this point welcome to take yourself off mute and ask out loud. I'll give everyone a minute or so to think if they have any questions.
I did see a comment in the chat. I just wanted to read out loud to everyone, just to make it more accessible. It is from Patty McNamara, who says, just to add this info about the process, in most jurisdictions in the United States, it is rare for the case to go to a preliminary hearing. Most jurisdictions present the case directly to the grand jury, which is one-sided, no defendant, and no cross-examination. Then the case proceeds to eventually being resolved by plea or trial. And Patty is an attorney at the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. Thank you so much for sharing that, Patty. If anyone else, has a background in this area or has any knowledge who would like to provide more information, either to myself or to the individual attendees who are here as well, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Patty.
We had someone also ask for your information again, so I did post that in the chat as well.
Great. I see Rebecca Feldman.
So you had talked about before about the involvement of a survivor like in a criminal case. So how involved is the survivor in a civil suit compared to that of a criminal case, and how long does a civil suit normally take compared to like pursuing a criminal case?
That's a great question. So I can kind of answer that from my experiences that I've had talking with other people, and from my own knowledge and research. Of course, again, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give any legal advice. But from the best of my understanding is that the civil trial you would be involved with a lot more, because so in a criminal trial, it's usually, the state of Pennsylvania, the defendant. When you're in a civil case, it is going to potentially be, survivor v. defendant. So because you're representing yourself and there's no representation directly of the state, it's probably going to be a much heavier involvement. A lot of times people have indicated that it can be, a really invasive process. And like I was talking about a little bit before, sometimes the questions and the things that get through on the civil side that wouldn't get through on the criminal side, because you have those protections and motions in existence for survivors on the criminal side, don't exist on the civil side to the same extent. So it can definitely be a more invasive process for persons who I've spoken with who have gone through with civil cases have kind of indicated that to me. But everyone has their own experiences. So the length of time can really depend too on how many people you've named as defendants. So if it's one person and it's an individual who doesn't necessarily have a lot of assets, it might be a much faster trial. I really can't give you a time frame because it really depends on the individual facts. But if you're going for like a university or a really large organization, it can certainly take a lot more time, the more witnesses that they have to depose, to ask questions to investigate. So it all really depends, and that's the typical, lawyerly answer that I'm always given when I ask, but there's really no rhyme or reason to that.
Awesome, thank you. I'll give everyone a little more time. We have a few minutes left if anyone has any more questions. Otherwise, I am also posting in the chat the link to sign up for our last 2 events of our Spring Week of Action here. In about 30 minutes, we will be doing another meditation with a little bit of movement. And then this afternoon, another of our regional advisors, Thomas, will be presenting on including asexual and intersexuality in the gender-based violence advocacy sphere. So a lot of cool stuff coming up. If there aren't any other questions at the moment, you do have Shira's information. You're welcome to reach out to her or to me as well. And I wanted to thank Shira for that presentation. That was really awesome and informative. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was great being able